This is the Peace and Justice Review, dedicated to shedding light on important issues involving the environment, human rights, economic and social justice, and struggles for peace around the world. This program hopes to inspire dialogue and action for social change in Vermont and in our country. We encourage you to find out more by calling the Peace and Justice Center at 863-2345 or stop by and visit our extensive library at 21 Church Street in Burlington.
Good afternoon. My name is John Tucker. I'm the director of the Racial Justice and Equity Project at the Peace and Justice Center. And this is the first of some shows that are going to be done and face the issues of race in America and here in Vermont as they stand in the year 2000. Today, I'm going to introduce to you a very prominent scholar, a professor, a teacher, a father, and a man with a history that should prove quite interesting to a number of you, Dr. H. Lawrence McCrorey. And why don't we start with you, Larry? Why don't tell people a little bit about yourself and your background.
Well, first of all, let me say what a pleasure it is to talk to you. It always is.
Absolutely.
My background, well, it certainly is not that unusual. My early life was, I think, very typical of other black people of that era. I grew up in a racist society, and that has many implications. As you know, I was born in Philadelphia, along with you, but not at the same time, and raised across the river in Camden, New Jersey, when it was still a city. In 1944, I graduated from Camden High School and went to the University of Michigan, but I was only there one semester because the war was on, and I went into the service. That in itself is interesting because I really wanted to go into the Navy and or the Air Force. And of course, I couldn't get into either one of those. But I ended up in the Army. And I was in the Army until 1947. Then I went back to the University of Michigan, where I got a bachelor's degree in science and a master of science. And went to Philadelphia in 1950. I couldn't get a job.
Well, what kind of work did you do, Larry, to be specific?
Well, with a master's degree in science, I thought I'd be in pretty good shape. And every place I went, they would hear my voice on the telephone and be very excited about the prospect of my working. And then when I got down there for an interview, the whole attitude would change, of course. And they were either the job had already closed up, or I was too qualified for the job, or any of a number of excuses, as I'm sure you're familiar with. At any rate, I ended up parking cars at the Benjamin Franklin Hotel garage in Philadelphia, where I worked for about a year. And in 1951, a member of the Friends Service Committee, which is a Quaker organization, called me. I never got to see this individual, but he called me and told me that they were going to integrate Sharp and Dome, the pharmaceutical house in Philadelphia, and that he was interested in my becoming the first black to be hired by that organization in a professional capacity. I said that I would be interested in doing that, and as a matter of fact, I did get hired, where I worked for a little over 4 years. The director of research, Carl Beyer, at Sharp and Dome, called me into his office one day and said that the organization, Sharp and Dome, was going to send one person to school to get a PhD, and that I had been chosen. And so I was very, very lucky to be in the right place at the right time. I was sent to University of Illinois, College of Medicine, where I got a second master's degree in physiology and a PhD.
Let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
I want to go back to that time again. For almost a year, you parked cars.
Yes.
Now, when you went to Sharp and Dome,
Yes.
did you take a test?
Yes. That's a story in itself.
Could you share the circumstances of that test with us?
I was called by Sharp and Dome. Remember now, they had never hired a black person in a professional capacity. only as the janitorial staff. And so I was called down on Broad Street. I'm sure you know where Sharpendale
Right,
was,
absolutely.
on Broad Street, and was given a battery of examinations all day, 8 hours of exams, 4 hours in the morning, 4 hours in the afternoon. And I did very well. Did so well that, as a matter of fact, I was called back the next day because I had done too well in mathematics. And there was some question about whether or not.
You cheated.
Yeah, well, whatever.
Right.
At any rate, I retook the test and did very well again. That was that. I got hired with 7 white fellows at the same time. 8 of us got hired at the same time. And we became friends. And after about a week of working together, we were talking one day, and I told them how difficult I thought those exams were. And they said, "What exam?" And I said, "The one that we had to take when we came in here." And they said, "Oh, you mean that 15-minute thing that they gave us?" And that was my first inkling that I was the only one who had been put through that particular rigor. At any rate, that was a long time ago. And I can't feel too badly about Sharp and Dome because they are primarily the reason that I'm where I am now. At any rate, I'm a scientist. I came here to the University of Vermont Medical School in 1966. I was here for 29 years, or there for 29 years. I retired in 1995, and now I'm a professor emeritus there. I'm teaching at the University of Vermont. I'm teaching at the St. George's University School of Medicine in Grenada, and I'm teaching at the University of New England in Armidale, Australia. So I'm having a great time, and I'm very happy.
I'd like to take you back again.
Okay.
When you came
you don't
to
want
Vermont,
me to be happy, do you?
No, no,
Okay.
no. When you came to Vermont, how many black faculty were at the University of Vermont?
There was one black faculty member. He was in Jack Clemens in pathology in the medical school. And so he and I were the only black faculty members on the campus at
So
that
you
time,
and Jack were kind of like
1966.
Jackie Robinson and Larry Doby.
That's a
Is that a
fair,
good analogy?
That's a fair analogy.
Yes. You in the National League and Larry in the American League, or vice versa.
Not quite that important, John, but that's okay. Yes, we were the only ones on the campus.
What was that like?
Well, it was like it's always been with me, the only one here, the only one there. It's been that way most of my life. So it wasn't strange to me at all. On the other hand, I was terribly upset by it in an educational sense. I felt that the students on that campus were being shortchanged by not having a more pluralistic faculty, not just black, but other people of color in particular.
Did you come alone?
Did I come along?
Yes.
You mean alone to Vermont?
Yeah.
No. I came, I brought a wife, and I brought 4 children. And I raised 4 children here.
Boys, girls?
1 boy, 3 girls, 3 daughters and a son. And now I have a granddaughter, Ellington, who is here. And it's very interesting because there were many problems at that time, problems that many of us fought in the school system. Now I find myself and my daughter facing those very same problems.
So you're saying 34 years later,
yes,
these same problems that
yes.
your children
Oh,
faced,
to
your
a great extent.
grandchild is facing similar problems.
To a great extent, yes. At any rate, I need to say something here, and that is that when you ask how I felt, a lot of things were changing in my life at that time. About a year before I came to Vermont, well, first of all, you have to understand that I was raised, I lived with racism all of my life.
When you use the term racism,
Yes.
I think that a lot of people in America and in Vermont in particular, but not just Vermont in particular, misuse that word.
Okay.
When you talk about racism, under what context or in what context are you?
Well, I'm talking about it both as individual or overt racism, but also as institutional racism. But what we're talking about when we talk about racism is prejudice plus power. Not just prejudice. Many people are prejudiced, and I'd like to talk about that in some detail maybe later on. But in any case, it's important to understand that this is prejudice plus the power to carry out these prejudices.
And that's the institution.
It doesn't matter to me that you might not think that my hair is pretty or whatever, or even acceptable. Doesn't matter to me. But if you can use that as a way of keeping my children out of decent schools or keeping me from getting a job and so forth, then that's very serious business. So racism carries with it a power function, the power to carry out these feelings in society that can be exerted on another individual or a group of individuals. At any rate, I lived with racism all my life, as all of us have.
I find that interesting, what you're saying. You said you've lived with racism all your life.
Oh, yeah.
And somewhere I read Arthur Ashe, the famous
Yes.
tennis player,
Yes, of course.
said that there was never a time in his life in America
Right.
that he wasn't reminded that he was black.
Right. And there's never been a time in my life, not a moment in my life, that I have not had a very, very strong reminder
Well, what about all
who
the
I am.
pundits and critics who say that it's no longer a problem?
Well, of course. I mean, that's America, you see. You have to understand that. And I know you do. I mean, I'm not talking to you. Racism is alive and well. And that doesn't mean that there haven't been changes. There have been changes, mostly in the realm of the law. We can do things now as people of color that we couldn't possibly think of doing 40 years ago. So the laws have changed, and incidentally, law is a terribly important element in this whole thing. But attitudes have not changed that very much, changed very much. And one still sees, for example, the hate stares. One goes in, no matter how many degrees, you can be a Colin Powell, you can be a whatever, one still gets followed around stores. When I walk into a store in Burlington, I'm followed all over the place, lest I steal something, and so forth. So all those things are still in place and still operative. Equally important, though, institutional racism still exists. And of course, it's harder to deal with that because there's nobody to point to. There's no individual to say, he is the person or she is the person who is doing this. It's just established practices which just go on, higher rates of unemployment, lower levels of schooling, for example, higher incidences of major diseases. These are all parts of an institutional system which just keeps going irrespective of who is pushing. So, yes, I've lived with racism all my life, as indeed all of us have, and continue to do so. The interesting thing is that one of the things that I run into as far as my teaching is concerned is that students will say to me, or even professors for that matter, will say to me, yes, but you're talking about attitudes when you grew up, for example, you know, an historic piece of the whole thing. There was a very interesting study done just a few years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, at the University of Chicago, in which they interviewed a large number of white people about their attitudes toward African Americans, toward black people. And something like 53% of those interviewed thought that blacks were less intelligent than they were. Some 51% thought that they were less patriotic. Some 56% thought that they were more violent than white people. Some 62% that they were more desirous of living on welfare and less desirous of being self-supporting. So on the average, more than 1 in 2 white people that I meet has those attitudes about me, and they don't even know me. Okay? That's what we're talking about. So it's not historic. I mean, it's not just history. I'm not stuck in some time warp back when I was growing up. The same things are true now in terms of attitude, not in terms of law, but in terms of attitude.
So the tragedy of race is that the gulf still exists between black and white in America.
That's part of the tragedy. The other part is that there's a denial that whites don't understand this or don't want to understand it.
Now, in some quarters, there are some of us, and I want to see how you feel about this, believe that also part of the problem that a part of black America, middle class and upper black middle class, have stepped back from these issues.
Yes, that's true. I mean, I think that's true. And I can almost understand it. That doesn't make it any easier to accept, but I can almost understand it. I tried, as all of us tried when I was growing up, tried to be accepted by this society. And I guess we would have done anything to have been accepted. You know, we put stocking caps on, we pressed our hair down so that our hair wouldn't offend white people. I mean, all these things show how sick this whole business is and how sick we were in trying to be accepted in that way. So I do understand the pressure to sort of better oneself, live a better life, live out from under racism. But unfortunately, I think those people that you're talking about are fooling themselves.
You see, the reason why I bring that up, as you know, in the sporting world, two events happened recently. Venus Williams
Yeah.
became the first black woman since Althea Gibson to win Wimbledon. And there was an interview by William Roden, a black sports reporter for the New York Times and columnist for them. And in the interview, Richard Williams, the follower of Venus and Serena Williams, said that the problem that a lot of black Americans had were that they was too busy trying to be white.
Yeah.
And that is a telling statement in the year 2000.
Yes, it is a telling statement, and as I say, it's very, very sad because, and again, I must admit that most of us growing up in my era were also pretty busy trying to be white. As a matter of fact, what saved me? Two things saved me. Let me give credit to two people.
Okay.
One is my wife, Connie, who got there before I did. She grew up in the same kind of setting that I did. She pressed her hair. I mean, she put those irons and so forth in her hair. She did all of that. She was as damaged by it as I was. But she began to understand the problem before I did, and thereby helped me understand it. So I was alluding to this earlier. So when we came here in 1966, she had already gotten there, and she was beginning to help me understand the whole business. And then both of us read the autobiography of Malcolm X. And that's what really did it for me. So I owe my life, and I mean this. I mean this with all sincerity. I owe my life to Connie M. and to Malcolm X. Otherwise, I would be one of those people you're talking about.
This is a remarkable book.
Oh, I wish everybody could read it.
Listening to you talk, and I guess my dad and mom kind of came from your same generation, or the edges of it.
Yep.
I thought back that, you know, that my dad graduated from Lincoln University in Oxford, Pennsylvania, traditionally black school, and best job he ever had in his life was the post office.
Right. That was typical.
And so you were parking cars, and he was working at the post office.
That's right.
Two educated black men in America in 1950, 51.
But you see, there is one of the costs of racism, lost talent. And I'm not saying, look what they've lost in me. I don't mean it that way. But what I mean is that was typical of our people. And to a certain extent, it still is. All this lost talent because of racism.
What did it cost us economically?
Oh, you know, hundreds
Those
of
barriers.
Millions. I mean, my God, you can't even figure that. You can't even figure it. But it costs us a lot in money. It costs us a lot in efficiency. But it also costs a lot in humanness.
And I'm saying that because you and I come from similar backgrounds. And we knew that. We both were born in Philadelphia. We weren't the first generations to go to college, and our children And so the cost of black America, I mean, and the denial that I feel, and that's what you've been talking about, the denial that these problems, and that these problems can be overcome with 20 years of laws. Do you believe that? That we can ever make up the ground that we lost from slavery to
Well,
Reconstruction?
Well,
into-
ever, ever is a long time, John. But more and more, unfortunately, I haven't lost all hope. Derek Bell has lost all hope.
You mean faces at the bottom of the well?
Faces at the bottom of the well.
Explain that.
Derek Bell, who is an eminent professor of law, in his incredibly well-written book called Faces at the Bottom of the Well, says that racism will always be with us, it being a very integral, permanent, and indestructible component of our society. And it's very, very difficult to disagree with that.
And Tom Wicker,
Yep. Same thing.
Tom Wicker, of eminent columnist
Right.
and writer and author, the book that I read that just broke my heart was Racial Integration,
Yes.
a Tragic Failure.
Yes. Yep.
Here we are, year 2000.
Well,
Between us, we have 7 children. You have 4, I have 3, all with higher education. What do they face? What do our grandchildren face, Larry?
more or less the same thing that we have faced. And what I was going to say at the end of what you just said was that the teacher in me keeps that little bit of hope alive, because you can't be a teacher without thinking that change can take place. That's what education is, okay? On the other hand, it's getting dimmer and dimmer, and the bottom line, though, as even Derek Bell says, is that with or without hope, we must continue to struggle against these things. And you have brought your children up that way, and I have brought my children up that way, and that's the only thing that's going to save them. Because once they think that the problem is not there anymore, once they think that they can now walk out into as if they were white, they're dead.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
And my daughter understands that, and my daughter is bringing her daughter up, who is now 12 years old, to understand that. And that, to me, is the only salvation that we have.
Yeah, my
to
2 daughters
continue
and son
this
understand that.
struggle.
Yeah, they're of the same mind. And, you know, I'm glad that you brought that up. As an educator, I guess I'm more or less an activist around these issues in the latter stages of my life. And people become annoyed with me. And I need to point out both black and white alike.
Yeah, I know. Me too.
I've been called extremist.
Yeah, I know.
And they think that what we do is easy. I think that it's probably the most painful work that I've done in my life.
Well, it's
Because
painful to me. It's very painful to me. It's painful in a number of ways. It's painful because I'd rather not have to think about these things, okay? Now, I don't have that luxury, nor do you. But I'd like not to have to think about them, because, you see, these things occupy every moment of my existence. I mean, and one could say, well, then you're crazy. Maybe I am. As a matter of fact, maybe every person of color is. Because I don't see how you can live in a society like the one in which we live and not be somewhat crazy. I don't know how you can survive this and not have something wrong. I mean, I carry baggage that I will never be able to get rid of. I know that. After all these years and all my degrees and all my, in quotes, success, at least by the standards that we use to measure those things, I still walk into a restaurant and wonder whether I'm going to be served. That's very sad.
I want to go back to the denial, because in doing this work, and you and I both, and I mean, and we have some friends that do this work and feel this way. I mean, invariably when the issues are black and white, 70% of the time I find that, particularly with white Americans, what we'll come up with is other groups, the handicapped, and try to put black America's plight in competition with other groups that suffer
Yes,
from some kind of,
but of course. Yes.
and That just happened to me 2 weeks ago. One person who I consider a friend and one person who I just met that day. And if you're passionate about this, you're accused of being angry. But what I was struck by was the absolute denial that racism is alive and well in Vermont.
Yeah.
What was it like for your children in school? Let's go back to that time.
Well,
And one other thing I want to ask you about, because I heard a famous story about you. I heard that when you came here, that you and Connie were headed out on a trip, and you looked at the map, and on the map was the name of a mountain and pond.
oh yeah. Well,
Do you remember that incident?
do I remember it, John?
Well, why don't you share
Do I
that with people
remember it?
so
I
that people
can't
understand
forget it.
what you faced when
I,
you came to
I
Vermont?
can't forget the Irisburg affair.
Right.
I can't forget Niggerhead Mountain. I can't forget Cake Walk at the University of Vermont. I mean, these are things that are so etched into everything that I am that I'll remember them all. As a matter of fact, I don't want to forget them because I want to remember and be reminded all the time of what kind of society we live in. I don't want to forget that any more than the Jews want to forget the Holocaust.
What happened in the schools?
But do you want me
You
to
don't
talk
have to
about
give me a
Niggerhead
go-by,
Mountain? You wanna-
but Niggerhead Mountain, was that on the map?
Of course it was on the official state
Did it say
map here.
Niggerhead Mountain on the map and
It
pond?
said Niggerhead Mountain and Niggerhead Pond, of course. And we fought that like crazy.
And what was
And the person that I need to, whose name I need to invoke here is Otis McCrorey,
Okay.
who led that fight. He led us to Montpelier, to hearing after hearing down there with the State Library Board. And, oh yeah, to try to get that name changed. It was,
and they couldn't see why the name needed to be changed.
Of course not. I mean, at any rate, we were able to get it changed, and that's a positive thing.
How long did it take?
I don't remember exactly, but it took a long time. It took a long time and a lot of fighting. Cakewalk took a long time and a lot of fighting.
A lot of
on
people
that
don't know what
campus.
cakewalk is. What is that?
Cakewalk was supposedly an athletic event in which, for the homecoming kind of exercise here on the campus at the University of Vermont, fraternities had teams of two fraternity brothers who would paint their faces black, dressed up in sort of minstrel costumes, and walk 4D cake, do a cakewalk kind of thing, and it was a competition. And people, for 80-some years, I mean, this was the biggest thing that happened, which says something about Vermont, incidentally, but that's beside the point. This was the biggest thing, and people look forward to alumni still. I still get calls after all these years about, isn't there some way we can bring it back? At any rate,
What were you doing when you got involved in this issue about the cakewalk? What was your position at the university then?
I was an assistant professor in physiology in the medical school. And let me tell you, all of us on the campus at that time, all of us people of color, and a significant number of white people, faculty and staff, were very much against it and fought it like crazy. And you have no idea. Many of us put our jobs and our lives on the line. I'm serious.
You received threats.
Threats. Oh, God, there were fights. I mean,
Physical fights.
Oh, yeah. I went around to fraternities to try to explain to them the racist nature of what they were doing. And let me tell you, it was very scary. And there were fights on the campus, yes. In addition to all of that, well, I don't have to go into any more details. But in point of fact, President Rowell finally took it upon himself to bring it to an end. And let me tell you, many of us have never been forgiven for that. I'm serious. That was many years ago now. And as I just said, I still get calls from merchants around the Burlington area and from alumni saying, can't we somehow bring it back in a non-racist way? Okay? a lot of us fought that fight. Students, many people were involved in that. At any rate, in the schools you want to know about.
Your children,
Yeah,
you,
my kids caught
Connie.
hell. My kids caught hell. I mean, they were called names constantly. I was down there, you know, over and over and over and over again trying to deal with that. And
where were you living at in Vermont at that time?
I was living in Charlotte, but it didn't matter. It was happening all over the state. I don't want to point to any one school.
Okay.
It was just general. And the teachers, I mean, educational professionals, instead of trying to deal with this, instead of trying to get the little white kids and make better citizens out of them by using that teachable moment, rather than do that, they would throw their hands up and say, we don't know what to do. These are education professionals. That's very, very disheartening. At any rate, my kids endured the same way I did, and the same way you did with all of this. What's sad about this is that these same kinds of things are happening now. And that's 30 years, that's 30-some years ago.
Yeah, as you know, I sit on a committee,
Yes.
State
on the
Advisory
Civil
Committee
Rights
to the U.S.
Co- right.
Commission Civil Rights, and we turned out a report over a year and a half ago about the racial harassment of children of color in the Vermont public schools.
Right.
And I think I need to point out the historical significance of your life has come course when you were talking about some of the prominent testimony before us was by your daughter, Leslie, and about her daughter, Ellington.
It makes me
As
feel
I
good,
sat
John.
there, I felt it was ironic that here we are 32 years later, and here's Leslie, following in her father's footsteps, addressing the very same issues that you addressed as a parent. And I think sometimes, and I look at my own life, that my own children as parents end up facing some of the very same issues that I had as a parent, that your father had as a parent, as my father.
Well, you think about this whole thing. I mean, yes, you could give the history of the whole thing, but in the past few years, there have been many sort of Herculean efforts. Your Civil Rights Commission report, which has been out there now for a little while. People, wonderful people. If I had heroes, these people would fall in the category of hero. Phil Hoff, for example.
Absolutely.
And I've admired Phil Hoff for so long. If it were not for Phil Hoff, that whole Irisburg affair thing would have been just horrendously worse than it was. Phil Hoff intervened on that one. But Phil Hoff and Kim Cheney and people
Jerome
like that.
Diamond,
Jerome
Clarence
Diamond, that's
Sordak.
right. I mean, those people have taken it upon themselves to try to deal with this whole school issue, which I think is the most important social issue in the state of Vermont. That's a personal view because of how many people are destroyed by this. Not just those kids of color, and they are destroyed incidentally, but not just them, but what about the white kids? Is that the message that we really want to send? I mean, let me just give one anecdote,
Yeah.
because you know, from the Vermont Human Rights Commission, I heard these things over and over and over again. But a little black child gets on the school bus every day, and every day she's faced with all the epithets, nigger, coon, the whole thing, and every day ends in tears. And she gets so she doesn't want to go to school anymore. And her mother is just pleading with the school to do something about this problem. And like 6 months go by, nothing. And then finally, the school takes this into advisement and does something. And their solution, to take that child off that school bus and put her on a special education bus. Now, yes, that child is destroyed, but what about the white kids? What about the white kids who see that solution? Is that the message that we want to send? Oh, I know how to get rid of black kids. Just call them names long enough, and they disappear automatically. Is that what a mother or father wants his or her child to get? That's very sad.
But when you say that the school who has no course in racism
Right.
only reflects the attitudes of the children that come
course.
to school, reflect the community at large
Of course.
and the community that we live in.
Of course, John, but just as one would expect the church to be out front on the cutting edge of these things, one also ought to expect the educational institution to do that. And unfortunately, neither one of those things is true. That's very sad. But the Champlain Initiative is another one. People who are absolutely dedicated to try to make a change. And with all that going on, it's just very depressing that there is so little progress being made. I'm sure that my daughter is going to take her daughter out of the school system.
And put her on home.
Whatever. Take her out of here completely. I mean, I may lose both of them in the process. I think they're going to leave. Many black people have left because of this one thing. I have a friend who was the director of admissions at the University of Vermont.
Oh, yeah.
Her son was a wreck in this place. She got a job in Florida.
At Florida International, right?
Her son has blossomed like crazy. Just beautiful. Just that change. I have something here I'd like to share with you, as a matter of fact. if I
Absolutely.
can
Share it
find
with the public.
Well, if I can find it. I don't know where it is. I'll find it. I'll find it. But go ahead, and I'll look for it.
Well, the idea of these programs
Oh, I
that we'll
have
be
it.
seeing in the future is to inform and educate and to combat what I've seen happen, which is denial and the gradualism of dealing with issues that affect children's lives in a very destructive manner. As Larry, and I can't emphasize this as much, black children are injured because, and Larry knows this, the first time that my youngest child was ever called nigger occurred in the state of Vermont. And the denial then, and that was 20 years ago, and she has never forgotten that incident. But the other part is sad is America right now, and in Vermont, we all seem to be concerned, and the big issue is violence among us and violence among our children. So what we have is another form of violence that's being perpetuated. But I also want to point out when sitting on that committee, Larry, that the violence wasn't just name calling. There were physical attacks too that had to do with color. And we have other problems in the school because I know that someone's going to point that out. But I think America needs to be comfortable with black Americans talking about the thing that affects their lives most directly all the time, which is the racism in America. And that's where I stand. That's all I have to say.
Well, I stand in the same place, but the teacher in me goes just a little bit farther than that, and that is that I think whites need to understand the damage that racism causes them, causes the dominant society. I mean, yes, we're damaged by it. There's no question about that. I could go on and on and on and talk for hours about how damaging it is to people of color. But I contend that whites are equally damaged by their racism.
Could you
and
expand
whites
on that?
need to understand that.
Expand
They
it.
need to, well, just in what I've said about the children, for example. Is that the value system that a parent ought to want? And I say no. At least as a parent, I don't care a parent of whom. As a parent, I would not want this. Look, when the Boston schools were integrated, and that was only a few years ago, as long as I live, I will remember the picture on the front page of the Boston Globe of these white women with their babies in their arms, spitting on and throwing rocks at little black children, 4- and 5-year-old children, on their way to the newly integrated schools. I will never forget that picture. Those people are sick. They wouldn't throw rocks at dogs, but at little 5-, 6-year-old black children, what difference does it make? And that's very sad. And that's racism damaging the dominant society. It is a sickness, John, and I wish people would understand that. It is a mental sickness. It resembles the psychoses. You take prejudice. Prejudice is having these preformed ideas about things. I think that women can't fly airplanes. That's a prejudice. But then, when I see a woman fly an airplane better than any man I've ever seen, I have to change that. So prejudices are fluid. When one has better information or new information, one has to alter what one believes. That's prejudice. Racism is not like that. In the face of all kinds of new information or better information, people still hold on to these same views that they always had.
It's been handed from generation to generation.
Of course, and it's taught very early. It's taught very early to the newest generation.
And so,
And it's very much like psychosis. Look, a psychotic.
Right.
What happens? The psychotic says, the elephants are coming. The elephants are coming.
Absolutely.
Right? And no matter how much you show that person that there are no elephants within 10,000 miles of here, the elephants are still coming. Now, you can control it. You can give them drugs, quiet them down, and then they say, the elephants are coming. The elephants are coming. It's still there. That's racism. It doesn't matter that there is a Colin Powell. It doesn't matter that there are all kind of black scholars, I mean, who are just so brilliant, it's not even fun. It doesn't matter. All of us are stupid. All of us are dumb. All of us are unpatriotic. All of us, and on and on and on and on. And there's no information that one can give to alter that belief.
and all of us
It's
that
a
have
sickness,
succeeded
John. It's a
happened
sickness.
because we got an extra break that
Oh,
they didn't
yeah,
get.
of course. Affirmative action, which of course wasn't even in existence when I came along and when you came along, but that's okay. That's the point.
How many colleges were open to you when you came along in America, besides the traditionally black colleges?
Well, it depends upon it depends upon what you mean by open to me. I would
How many
assume
states
that all of the northern states were open to me.
were they?
Well, I think so. But on the other hand, what happens in those universities? I went to the University of Michigan, which is one of the finest in the sense of education, in the sense of schools and so forth, and the finest institutions in the whole world. I mean, top law school, top medical school, top right on down the line, okay? It was probably one of the most racist experiences I've ever had in my life. Black women could not even live in the dormitories when I went to the University of Michigan. They had to live with a black woman who had a house in the neighborhood. Black women were not allowed in the dormitories at the University of Michigan. When I went through orientation at the University of Michigan, it was a week-long orientation, okay, as a freshman with a first-year student. A week long, and each one of us got an envelope, and the envelope had a schedule of all the activities for that week. And so, you know, you'd go and you'd register or you'd find out what was happening and so forth and so on. And I got back to my dormitory one day, and a white fellow who was in that same orientation said, "Are you going to the Coke date?" I said, "What Coke date?" The dance tonight. It's in your packet. I looked in my packet, and there was no invitation for me. And after more study, there was not an invitation to any of the socials in any of the black students' packets. Now, can you imagine a scene? There were 21,000 students at the University of Vermont then, Michigan then, so 5,000 in the freshman class. Can you imagine what kind of effort it took for somebody there to go through 5,000 packets and remove all the social information for the black students?
Well, doesn't Leon Higginbottom, before he died, tell a story about how he was asked to come to speak at the commencement at Purdue Law?
Yes, he does.
And what had happened was he had been accepted at Purdue Law.
Right.
And when he showed up, that was the first time they got a look at him, and they said that he could not attend
Right.
there. The same thing happened to a judge in New York, Bruce Wright. When he went to Princeton, he was accepted, and when he showed up at Princeton, they told him he made a mistake. So This was
That's
so-
standard fare.
So,
I mean,
so
that's not
while
unusual.
the South was being hammered for being segregationist,
Right.
what you're saying in the North there was another kind of segregation.
There
that
certainly
went on.
was, and there always has been.
Okay.
There certainly was, and there always has been. My friend here told me the story about, there's a white fellow, told me a story about taking a black friend of his to a restaurant in Chicago. Now in Chicago, at that time, they had to let you in, okay? Whereas when I went to school, University of Michigan, restaurants in Ypsilanti wouldn't even let you in. All right, but they had to let you in Chicago.
You mean in
Big-
Ann Arbor?
No, Ypsilanti, which was 8 miles from Ann Arbor.
Oh, that's right, 'cause
That's where I
Eastern
live.
Michigan is there too,
That's right,
right?
that's where I live.
So you had to live where Eastern Michigan was as opposed to Michigan.
No, I didn't have to, but a lot of veterans lived there because
okay.
Willow Run was there, and they used that as housing for the veterans who were coming back after the war. At any rate, to get back to my story, so my white friend here took a black friend of his into a restaurant in Chicago. And again, the law in Chicago said you must let black people in, okay? They salted his food so much that he couldn't eat it.
Really?
Oh, yeah. And that was standard practice. That was
I
standard
can
practice.
remember
when
now,
was
I don't know if
going
you
on.
remember this, you come from Philadelphia and Camden.
Yes,
Being a boy, being taken to the movies
right,
in West Philadelphia by my mother.
Right.
And or both of them.
right.
And having to sit in the balcony.
Oh, of course. I sat in the balcony in Camden, New Jersey. And my mother could never...
This was the North now.
That's
this was-
Camden, New Jersey.
Right.
And my mother could never quite adequately explain to me why we had to sit in the balcony. Yes. But you see, but those stories, I mean, one could go... And I don't want to bore people with anecdotes.
Right.
I mean, it's ridiculous. But if you want to understand this country, you have to understand some of these things. For example, the Jim Crow cars, okay? When I would go south to visit my folks in the South, you could ride any place in the train that you wanted to until you got to Washington,
D.C.
D.C. Then you had to get off and get in the Jim Crow car to go further, okay? Now, let's take Washington, D.C., which is the nation's capital. I mean, that's the heart of America, okay?
Right.
Symbolizes
The home-
everything. Of
The
course.
home of the brave,
Of course.
the land of liberty.
Yeah, of course. Now, in Washington, when you got off of that train and went out to get a taxi cab, black people couldn't get a cab because blacks were not allowed to ride in white taxi cabs, and black taxi cabs were not allowed to pull up to the station. Now that's Washington,
I
D.C.
remember that because I can share that and just to
course.
back that story up. Some years later, my dad decided that I would go to a private school in the South, which is now a traditionally 4-year college, but this was a high school and junior college in South Carolina. And I can remember riding from Philadelphia, getting to Washington, D.C., and us being put
Oh, yeah.
into and the train was almost empty.
Oh, yeah.
But the colored car, they call it,
That's right.
for colored people,
That's right.
was packed.
Right.
People were standing.
Right.
I stood
That's,
from Washington, D.C., almost into North Carolina because I was young.
well, you see, we weren't allowed to eat in the dining car. And it was standard fare for us to have a shoebox.
That's right.
Have a shoebox when you get on the Jim Crow car
That's
with the
right.
chicken and all
And the
that kind of
chicken,
stuff
yes.
in it. Right. And then finally, as things began to evolve, they began to let blacks eat in the dining car. And I can remember this very well. But they would pull a curtain around your table so that your presence in that dining car would not offend the white passengers. Do you know what that does to the personality? Do you know the negation of personality that kind of thing causes?
What we're talking about is that all these things have led into the present day
Yes,
conditions that exist right here in Vermont today,
yes.
right? Wouldn't you say? Since I've gotten about 2 or 3 phone calls this week about issues around race
Yes.
alone,
Yes.
and which I will not.
And the laws have changed, and I still maintain that the law is a very, very important element in
But can
in
we
this
get
whole
them to
thing.
enforce the law?
Well, in many cases, in many cases, it is being enforced. I mean, we can't be unreasonable. On the other hand, it's not always enforced. And again, attitudes have changed very little.
So, in my thinking, what I'm dealing with when people stand in front of me and say they don't see color, I don't believe that. One, I don't believe that because of the fact that they come from somewhere. They have families like I do. Their grandparents, their parents, and their great-grandparents all participated in this thing called race in America. And that's why I'm saying that, Larry. I think that's the importance of history and why I feel white America is in constant denial about its history, the history of this country, especially what has happened to black Americans.
Yeah, there's no question in my mind about that. But no one has to take our word for it. I mean, scholars have studied this. There are reports on this. The New York Times has just done a whole series on this whole business. And if you've read that, or if anybody's read that, you know that what we're saying is pretty accurate. And it's very sad. The children thing, I think, bothers me more than anything else. I can protect myself. My kids now can protect themselves, even though they were damaged by it growing up. But they can protect themselves. But I just worry about the children. And again, not just children of color, all children, because if we're ever going to make a society out of this thing that is supportive of all of us, then those attitudes are going to have to change. And we're not doing very much to change those attitudes. In fact, it's getting worse. I think racism in this country is worse now than it was 15, 20 years ago. There's no leadership at all at the national level. And at least there was something.
What about the local level?
Oh, I think there's some leadership here. I mean, I think that there are many, I've mentioned some responsible leaders of our society here at the local level. In fact, I think Vermont, you see, I have always felt, and this doesn't mean that there's no racism in Vermont. I mean, it's alive and well, as we've been saying. But I think that if there is ever a place where we ought to be able to get on top of this, it is Vermont. That's one of the reasons that I've stayed here so long. I think it's doable.
I came here for different reasons.
Yeah, I know you do.
And we've often talked about that. I think that with a population as small as us, that we needed to take it on differently. The whole civil unions business gave me some hope. But again, I know that race is more difficult to deal with for white Americans. But there's still two difficult issues that I'm talking about: sexuality,
right,
and the issue of race, the freedom of choice. These are all issues that haunt us constantly. But I also think in the middle of that sits race, untouched. And I worry, because I think we have some competent leaders in this state. But what I worry about is sometimes they search around for the wrong voices to give them advice about how to handle a situation. And I think sometimes they look to be pacified.
Of course. It's more comfortable that way.
Yeah.
Well,
and gradualism absolutely drives me. I'd rather for you not to do anything than give me something that is full of gradualism.
well, I think that's going to be a continuing problem, John. I don't see any solution to that in the near future. You asked me about are we ever going to be able to do anything about this? Again, I'm losing hope more and more each day. I'm not sure that white America has the moral fortitude to really deal with this problem. Because in order to deal with it, they don't have to do anything for me or for you. They've got to do something for themselves. They have to look at themselves. I mean, there was a very interesting experiment that was done where they asked white people, a whole bunch of white people, this is a very controlled study, what does it mean to be white? And they couldn't answer the question. And they couldn't answer it because one of the things that it means to be white is you never have to even think about it.
Well,
And you see, I think they need to think about it.
We're going to continue this talk in another
Okay.
show, but
All right.
coming to a close, I have a second concern. And my second concern is the growing number of black Americans that I see that are willing to sit back
Yep.
and act like this doesn't happen, And I see even sacrifice some of their dignity, some of their children's dignity, and some of us, our dignity as a people. Worst of all, to insult my intelligence with what you and I have had to live with all our lives and what they had to live with their lives, no matter who they are, no matter what their earning power, no matter what their class situation. But in closing, I want to say that hearing you speak today and talking to you and having you continuously in my life is as important to me as my own children and family. And I think you know that. And I think that Vermont, you've got a chance today to look at someone who has been a leader in this state and around these issues for many, many years. And to young people out there, take advantage of this man and his experience. Let him share with you his trip through time and what it takes to succeed. He has a message for all of us. And we need not let America forget men like Dr. McCrorey and what they have meant to us as a people. I'd like to thank those of people who helped me put this on today for their kindness, Ed Everett, Laura, and the people here at Channel 15. But I just want to close on a note. Understand that James Baldwin said this, it's more painful to take on the place that you love and that you care about and be in the position of criticizing it. Because I don't think I could have grown up in a family, or Larry could have grown up in a family, that as much as we are critical and as much as we fight against the tide, we love this country. We are Americans. We have a rich history in America. And our contribution is not to put our heads in the sand. Thank you for your attention. Thank you again.
Thank you, John.
This is the Peace and Justice Review, dedicated to shedding light on important issues involving the environment, human rights, economic and social justice, and struggles for peace around the world. This program hopes to inspire dialogue and action for social change in Vermont and in our country. We encourage you to find out more by calling the Peace and Justice Center at 863-2345 or stop by and visit our extensive library at 21 Church Street in Burlington.
Good morning. My name is John Tucker. I'm the director of the Racial Justice and Equity Project at the Peace and Justice Center. And this morning I have two distinguished guests. First one is Dr. Lawrence McCrorey, who's been on this show before, retired professor of UVM and currently teaching in Grenada and Australia. And to his left sits Vaughn Carney, Esquire, a graduate of Harvard Law, undergraduate, Colgate. And Vaughn's second book has written a second book, his first book being Vaughn's.
Swiss Movement.
And this one, Straw Man, which is a profane fable of the Harvard Law School. Certainly sounds interesting to me. I'm going to be reading it tonight.
Extremely well done.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, gentlemen.
And let me say that this is a very easy show for me to do because of the fact that sitting at the table are two men that are part of a very small group of people whose opinions I thoroughly trust, and who I go to for guidance sometimes, and argument and other things, but never have two people gained such respect from me living here in Vermont. This morning, gentlemen, we're going to start off talking about Florida, and I thought that I would read a little something that has been circulating on the email. Subject, election. A history professor from Uppsala University in Sweden called to tell me about an article she had read in which a Zimbabwe politician was quoted as saying that children should study this event closely, for it shows that election fraud is could not only occur in the developing world. Imagine that we read of an election occurring anywhere in the third world in which the self-declared winner was the son of the former prime minister, and that former prime minister was himself the former head of that nation's secret police. And imagine that self-declared winner lost a popular vote, but won based on some old colonial holdover from the nation's pre-democracy past. 3, imagine that self-declared winner's victory turned on disputed votes cast in a province governed by his brother. 4, imagine that poorly drafted ballots of one district, forgive me, I thought I had these papers organized. I think you see what direction we're headed in this morning. Was a poorly district heavily favoring the self-declared winner's opponent, led thousands of voters to vote for the wrong candidate. 5, imagine that members of the nation's most despised caste, fearing for their lives and livelihoods, turned out in record numbers to vote in near universal opposition to the self-declared winner's candidacy. That's really important. 6, imagine that hundreds of members of that most despised caste were intercepted on their way to the polls by state police operating under the authority of the self-declared winner's brother. 7, imagine that 6 million people voted in the disputed province, and that the self-declared winner's level lead was only 327 votes. Fewer certainly than the vote counting machine's margin of error. 8, imagine that self-declared winner and his political party opposed a more careful by-hand inspection and recounting of the ballots in the disputed province or his most highly disputed district. 9, imagine that the self-declared winner, himself a governor of a major province, had the worst human rights record of any province in his nation and actually led the nation in executions. 10, imagine that a major campaign promise of the self-declared winner was to appoint like-minded human rights violators to lifetime positions on the high courts of the nation. None of us would deem such an election to be representative of anything other than the self-declared winner's will to power. All of us, I imagine, would really turn the page thinking it was another sad tale of pitiful pre- or anti-democracy people in some strange land elsewhere. Gentlemen, this is what's circulating on the internet, which I'm not sure doesn't have a wider reader than most papers in the United States. So, Larry, why don't I start with you? Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Well, John, I don't know where to begin. If I can stay away from my own personal feelings about the candidates themselves,
Right.
and just try to think about the process, I think that nothing has disturbed me more than this, at least in the last 20 years or so. I mean, I am so depressed about this, I don't know what to do. And I think the depression comes not just from the outcome, not just from the mechanical things involved, like errors in counting and so forth, but from this country's, I think, inability, or inability is the wrong word, this country's interest in trying to look into this and get an accurate count of what really went on. I mean, they seem very happy to allow, for example, the disenfranchisement of blacks and other minorities, and to not even think about that. I don't see any interest in the press, for example, in terms of trying to delve into what may have gone wrong other than just mechanical counting. So it's very depressing to me. It's as if we have made no progress at all. Historically, of course, Florida was set up in a way to disenfranchise especially blacks. It seems to me that nothing much has happened since those days. So I guess I'm very depressed and I don't know what to do except be depressed. It's very sad.
Vaughn, as a lawyer, and what I consider certainly a legal mind bar none in this state, what do you have to say about this legally?
We are
legal.
We are witnessing the hijacking of an American presidency on a level of seriousness that far exceeds anything that occurred during the Watergate scandals. We're looking at allegations of widespread voter fraud from top of Florida right down to Miami-Dade. We're looking at all kinds of irregularities in the voting process. We're looking at the intimidation of minorities. And no one seems to be troubled by the notion of conflict of interest here.
When you say conflict of interest,
When I say conflict of interest, I'm talking about either an actual conflict of interest or the appearance of an impropriety, the appearance of conflict of interest, which is just as bad in law. What you have here is the state of Florida, which is governed by one candidate's brother. You have the Secretary of State, who is shamelessly partisan and who is the co-chair of that candidate's campaign in Florida. And nobody is asking for the recusal of these individuals from the process, which is very, very troubling because it taints the process.
well, a lot of people know a lot about the Bushes, but what about Katherine Harris makes you?
Katherine Harris is someone who is relatively new to the political arena. She comes from a very wealthy family. Her grandfather was one of the citrus kings, a multimillionaire, Ben Griffin, whose name adorns the football stadium at the University of Florida, who spent millions of dollars of his own money to ensure that segregation would remain the law of the land in the state of Florida.
Right.
So that's a backdrop for you. And Katherine Harris herself is shamelessly partisan. She was the co-chair of the Bush campaign in Florida. Should not have been a part of this process in any way, shape, or form, but nobody's really addressing that. I think that the confidence that people have in the process is badly shaken. Now, some pundit once remarked that the average attention span of the American public is 3 weeks. You know, if you give them any issue for longer than 3 weeks, they're going to get tired of it. We see all of these polls that are coming out indicating that the American public, whatever that is tired of this controversy and wants to move on. I think that's a myth. No one has ever polled me. No pollster has ever contacted me or
Let's
anybody
stop right
I
there.
know.
Let me stop
Or
right there. Have
anybody
you
I
ever
know.
been polled?
Not at all.
How long you been voting?
for quite a long time, John.
I've been voting long, and then Vaughn has. Vaughn's been voting for quite a while. Any of us ever been polled?
No.
Oh, okay. That's the other thing that bothers me
Sure.
in this whole business. When,
Sure.
when, and I have just got to put it this way.
Because polls make opinions.
That's right. When white media sits on TV and talks about the polls, who do they poll? Anybody got an answer for me?
I don't know anybody who's ever been polled. So,
I don't know any of my friends being polled. Now here we are, 3 black men well-educated, from black middle-class families. We just didn't become middle-class because we went to college. You remember anybody in your family being polled?
Never.
Larry?
No.
Oh, okay. Then let's go back.
Because I'm not tired of it, you see.
Neither am I.
I mean, I wish they would poll me. I am not tired of it. I want to see justice done in Florida. And
Wait a minute.
I frankly don't care how long it takes.
Let's stop right there. You
All
want
right.
to see what done?
Well,
Justice.
that's,
Okay.
Here's
that's the aim.
Here's the justice that I believe in, as Richard Pryor said. Justice
Just
means
us, yeah.
just us.
Okay.
That's what I believe, okay?
No, but seriously, I mean, how could any president even want to assume the president, or how could any candidate even want to assume the presidency as long as there is this air of uncertainty, this air of, that there may be something wrong with the process, something flawed? How could you want to be? Listen, if it takes forever, I want to see justice done. I want to see an as accurate account as there can possibly be. Not just the fact that the machines broke down or something like that, but I'm talking about disenfranchisement. I'm talking about people who weren't even allowed to vote, or who, having voted, their votes never counted.
Vaughn, do you really think
It never got into the process.
that there was intimidation in Florida?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do. There
Could you
are,
expand a
there are
little bit?
widespread reports
Of course.
intimidation at the polling places involving officers of the law in the state of Florida and black voters. People were intimidated. They were turned away. Their credentials were questioned. It was a process that can only be called shameful. And I think that you know, very little has been done to focus attention on that by the media. I think the media has largely glossed over that, and that's a crime of epic proportions.
Why do you think the media is glossing over this?
Well, because they don't want to appear as partial. They don't want to appear as partisan, and that's why they're giving short shrift to the question of voter intimidation, illegal rejection of credentials, and that kind of thing. I think that in large part, many in the media have been cowed by certain powerful elements within the Republican Party.
Larry?
I agree with all of that, but I think it's more than that. I think there are two elements in this thing. One is denial, of course. And as you well know, as all of us know, this country is in an incredible state of denial as far as racism is concerned.
Oh, okay.
As far as racism is concerned, and that's what this is. I mean, part of this is racism, okay? So that's part of it. I think the second part is that even those who are not in denial don't really ever want to admit to what this country has done to black people. Historically, all the way back to slavery, but even today. They don't want it to come to the surface. It's too embarrassing. It's too embarrassing.
Do you think? Where do you stand on this one, Vaughn?
Well, I'm in full agreement with what Larry says. America is still largely in denial on the issue of racism. There is more deceit, dishonesty, and
Right.
hypocrisy
Absolutely.
surrounding racism than any other issue in American life.
That's correct.
Still. There are those who say, oh, we've made a great deal of progress, but you know, we haven't gotten as far as we have to go. Yes, there has been some progress, but not nearly enough.
Let's take the
Not
gloves off.
nearly
There are going to be people watching this program sitting here identifying us, and they're going to say, Vaughn Carney, what does he have to complain about? I mean, he went to Harvard Law. He's a graduate of Colgate. Larry McCrorey, eminently successful. John Tucker, all of our children, and your children are not yet, but you have that bill coming, college graduates and so forth. I mean, what are they complaining about? Why are we here talking about this, Vaughn, do you think? I want to hear that from both of you.
Because I can never turn my back on those of my group who are less fortunate and underprivileged. They have no effective voice in American life. People
Larry?
like me have to serve as that voice.
Larry?
First of all, yes, there has been progress, but the progress has come in the form of laws and so forth. progress has not come in the form of attitudes and of institutional racism, which still exists. We are still poorer as a group. We are still less educated as a group. We are still earning less as a group. We are still sicker as a group than our white counterparts. And that's institutional racism, okay? Now, when you ask about Larry, with all Larry's degrees, let me tell you something. There's a name in this country for a person who has 5 degrees, as I have, for a person who has a sailboat, a person who flies an airplane,
Right.
a person so forth.
What is that?
Nigger. Just another nigger.
Vaughn?
Dr. McCrorey again says it all. I cannot disagree with anything he said. In fact, I wholeheartedly
As a
endorse
lawyer.
what he has said.
With all the laws that were written, do you think this country is capable of addressing these problems in Florida aggressively through the law?
No, I do not.
No.
And I think that, you know, it may sound very cynical, but when we get down to questions of money versus morality, money versus what's right, money usually wins. And that's what we're going to see in Florida. I believe that. Barring some cataclysmic event, we are going to see the crush of circumstance move this process forward and sweep aside many of the protests that are making their way up through the court systems in Florida now. I think a lot of those cases are going to be rendered moot simply because of the element of time. There's just not enough time to fully litigate and hear these things. I think one of the problems here is that the Republicans have used every scheme, artifice, and legal device to stop a full and fair and impartial recount in Florida. That's why we've run out of time down there. They have thrown up every roadblock available to stop a full, fair, and impartial recount.
And incidentally, this is nothing new. This has been going on in Florida for one long time. I mean, ever since the emancipation, as a matter of fact, or ever since the federal troops were pulled out in the, what was it, the Tilden Hayes election.
Yeah, the Great Compromise of
The Great
1876.
Compromise.
Go ahead.
And that
Stand on
compromise, well, that compromise was to pull the federal troops out of the South. And ever since then, Florida set itself up. That's why they have the county by county voting mechanisms, which are different. It set itself up so that it could continue to disenfranchise black people. Now, that has gone on all the time. The only reason it's come to light now is because of the closeness of the election. It matters now. It hasn't mattered that much in the past because it hasn't been that close.
Vaughn? What do you think about that?
Well, I think if there's one thing that both Republicans and Democrats can agree upon in this controversy, it's this, that if a full, fair, and impartial recount is conducted, Al Gore will win the presidency.
Yes, absolutely.
That's why the Democrats refuse to give up. That's why the Republicans are throwing up every roadblock they can get their hands on.
Right.
Because it's a foregone conclusion. We know what the result will be.
See, I have a problem with the whole thing. I mean, and I feel that what you're saying is true, but as I read through this email, and I get down to what really went on in Florida, and hearing you two sum it up and a legal and historical perspectives, is that I think America's investment based on this whole thing is its sale around the world that it has going on. Oh, look at us. We're promoting democracy. I mean, I think that influences a lot of what the media, I don't think the media is intimidated. I think the media, and this is my opinion, is part of the problem.
Of course.
I think that when you talk about institutional racism,
Right.
what I see are two white men who ran for president, a state that had a history of being Democratic before it turned Republican when the Dixiecrats broke away. And what I'm saying is what goes on in Florida, whether it had been a Dixiecrat state or Republican state, the same thing would have happened. But it happened in America because I think that Vaughn hit on something about the morality within the law, and you hit on something about the institutional racism. But, gentlemen, what we're describing is a system that is totally out of whack. Wouldn't you say?
Of course. I mean,
Completely out of control. And I don't think that they can afford,
well,
at this time in American history, to have that kind of scandal.
I don't know what you mean about completely out of control. I think it's very much in control.
Yeah.
It
Yes.
depends on who we're talking about.
I'm talking
in
about the
terms of
cover-up is
controlling.
out of control.
Oh,
I think that what Vaughn was hinting at
I hope it
is
is.
that they're beginning to peak now.
I hope it is. I hope the
Yeah,
cover-up
the
is out
covers
of
are
control.
beginning to draw back because when you see the denigration of Jesse Jackson
Yes, absolutely.
in the media now that's appearing as
See-
promoting racism for his own reason. Any black voice that's raised in opposition to this. So I think all of them are involved.
Yeah, so do I. I mean, there's no disagreement
I don't think
between
so,
the three of
no.
us. Vaughn and I have talked about this aspect that you're talking about now, and he is much more capable of discussing it than I am. But if I had to make a prediction, I would predict that Bush will get this election, that he will become president, but that the investigations and so forth will continue, and that one day, sometime down the line, some awful things are going to come out about what really happened in this thing, and it's going to be a terrible embarrassment. Now,
I had
don't know, what do you
I had a
think?
cynical friend, and I'm going to address this to Vaughn,
Sure.
who suggested that the TV media in particular has been very distant around the whole institutional racism stuff.
Of
and so
course,
forth.
they don't even mention it.
Articles like the Time magazines, like and Time magazine and so forth, have been going at this somewhat more. But that, you know, it's television's interest that in the next 2 or 3 years, 2020 and 60 Minutes and 60 Minutes 2, we'll have documentation after documentation over the years. I mean, it's good TV drama now.
Yeah.
Huh?
You're quite right. And I think that drama will heighten if the matter is not fully resolved and fairly resolved prior to January 20th.
Yes.
See, we don't have a constitutional crisis yet. We're not anywhere near a constitutional crisis. This government has every procedure in place for dealing with practically every contingency that can arise out of this. We don't have a problem with that. That's not an issue. If it has to be resolved by Congress, then it will be. If it has to be resolved by the Supreme Court, we have that avenue. There are plenty of legal ways within our system to resolve it. What I see down the pike is this. There are any number of Freedom of Information Act requests that have been drafted and filed, which prohibit the destruction of the ballots in Florida. What that means is that those ballots are going to be counted regardless of who is inaugurated on January 20th. And if it turns out sometime after January 20th that the individual who was inaugurated did not in fact get the popular vote, did not in fact win the vote of Florida, and is not in fact a legitimate president, then we will have a constitutional crisis of major proportions.
Yes.
We would be looking probably at the first recall of an American president in history. Now see, that is a constitutional crisis.
Well, the cynics would go further and say that both parties then would have to cover that up.
I don't think so. I don't think it's in the interest of the Democrats to cover it up. I don't think it's in the interest of the nation to cover it up. I think people have a right to know. That's why we have the Freedom of Information Act.
What do you
And-
think, Larry?
I'm a cynic. I'm a cynic.
So am I. So go ahead, Vaughn. We're going to, since you're more optimistic than Larry, we're going to give optimism a chance.
There would be so
And that's
many-
because we're older
There would
than
be
you.
so
That's
much
it.
effort to cover that up, it's not even funny. But that's okay. But he's young.
Yeah.
He has hope. He has hope. Let's keep hope alive.
Let's keep hope alive, right? Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
Well,
I've seen too much, I think, over the years. I don't believe I can think in those terms anymore.
well, that's why I say, and so many others feel, that we should not sacrifice fairness on the altar of expedience
Right.
in this.
I-
We have plenty of time to sort this mess out. We have plenty of time to do that. We have between now and December 18th. That's more than enough time to recount every vote that was cast in Florida and review all those that were disqualified. There's more than enough time to do this. But there's no interest in doing that.
So let's go back to the media. I had an argument with a local reporter we have a pretty good relationship, and he wants the proof. And what I wanted to say, and I didn't have time to say to him, I thought reporter's job was to dig out the truth. The hell he come to me for the truth for?
I was about to say, why does he want that from you? That's his job.
Yeah, and I thought that was reporter's job, right? To find out the truth. And the other thing I would like reporters to do in the future, before getting involved in these kind of disputes, is announce who it is that they support. Okay, I want to know if you're a Democrat,
But John, wait a minute.
Republican,
Wait a minute.
or an independent,
Reporting
or
is
a progressive
impartial.
as they are in Vermont.
Reporting is impartial, John. Come on.
Let me ask you a question. We're three intelligent black men. How many systems have we been in? Have you found them to be impartial when it comes to the question of racism?
Well, you can't be impartial. They can't be impartial. It is impossible to be so. So why not declare it and
Don't
get
you
on
think the
with it?
local media, I mean, I have to tell you something. This is the whitest local media that I have ever been around in my life, and I've been in some remote parts of the country.
Of course.
I never hear a disparate viewpoint other than the party line.
Right.
So, getting back to this, I think this is an important email. I mean, this is a document that states it. I mean, what this is hinting at is this conspiracy by one family to gain control of the presidency of the United States.
You see, this won't happen. In fact, I'm not even sure that many of your listeners will even understand what you just read. Not understand it. No, they can understand it.
What do you think they
But
don't
listen
understand?
to it. But listen to it. I wish every individual would listen to what you read or read what you read and then try to imagine what this country would do, what this government would do to that third world nation that we're talking about.
I read a
That
document
hypothetical
earlier. I read a document earlier in the show of email that is circulating that a professor in Zimbabwe had been teaching students. And number 5 of this email points, there were 10 points on this email. Number 5, imagine that the members of the nation's most despised caste, fearing for their lives/livelihoods, turned out in record numbers to vote in near universal opposition to the self-declared winner's candidacy.
Right.
That issue there. Let's talk about that one.
And we did.
Yeah.
We, as black people, turned out in record numbers.
What was the one that they did poll us for that, didn't they?
Yes.
93% of us, if I'm not mistaken, voted for
Mr. Gore.
For Mr.
Right.
Gore.
Correct.
Right.
Uh-huh. Now there's an issue that I want to bring up that's not here. We also talked about this. In Florida, there was a third-party candidate, 2 or 3 of them. One in particular who passes himself as a liberal. The Green Party candidate.
Right.
And I hear that they get quite enjoyment about being the deciding vote and passing this on to Bush.
Yeah.
They've been cackling over this.
Yeah. Some of them, not all. I think it's a lot like a hangover. A number of them woke up the morning after the election and shook their heads and said, my God, you know, it really felt good while we were doing it, but what have we done here?
Right.
There are a number of them who rue what they've done with Nader. They realize now that Ralph Nader is a very dishonest, dangerous, and disruptive element in American politics. What a lot of them do not know is that Ralph Nader accepted money from the Republican Party to air his TV ads in the state of Florida. Now, his followers, I'm sure, didn't know that. But, you know, to me, that's the height of
That
hypocrisy.
public record?
Yeah, it is. He acknowledged it.
See, the more we dig into this, the bigger the conspiracy becomes. See, and I want to go back to how America is passing itself off to the rest of the world as this bastion of democracy. Now, I don't know about the two of you. I've watched a lot of BBC and Canadian TV.
So do I.
And
So do we.
it's amazing to me that in the year 2000, that the guy with the most votes don't win the election. I mean, and I'm getting to Vaughn with this one, and you, Larry, because I want historical and so forth, this perspective on the Electoral College. Why was it set up in the first place? There's a lot of speculation about that.
Well, the Electoral College was set up largely to keep the southern states in the Union. They wanted to have a certain measure of clout in determining who would be president. And as a result of that, you got the 3/5 rule, which was
right.
all other persons. They couldn't use the word slaves in the Constitution because they didn't want to taint the document by using the word. They said all other, 3/5 of all other persons shall be counted for purposes of representation. It was that, and then it was the Electoral College that was enshrined in the process, so that the southern states would have more of a say in the determination of a president, and so that they would stay in the Union and remain faithful to it. That's why we have the Electoral College.
And the southern states had the least amount of white men.
Exactly.
Well, yeah.
Because nobody else could vote, could they?
Well, you had to be,
But white men.
Well, you had to be.
Let's clarify that.
Well,
Yeah.
the only people who had the franchise at that time were free white landowning males over the age of 21. That was your voting base.
So that meant women didn't vote.
Women didn't vote, slaves didn't vote,
Slaves
Indians
didn't
didn't
vote,
vote, nobody else
Indians
could
didn't
vote except propertied white men. That's how it was set up.
So that's what the Electoral College was
That's
set
how
up in
that,
first.
the Electoral
To
College
protect
springs from that.
slave owners.
Yes.
That's what we're talking about.
Yes, that's how that was one of the reasons, one of the factors
What was the
behind
others?
the establishment of the Electoral College, to keep the southern states loyal to the Union. Because, see, they were threatening to bolt Philadelphia when the Constitution was being drafted.
I know how they feel because I was threatening to vote Philadelphia myself.
No, they were threatening to walk out unless they got these special concessions. And that's how the Electoral College happened to be one of them.
Larry?
I have nothing to add. I mean, that is a historical perspective. And the representation which would be attributed to or applied to those various states obviously depended upon the population. Population of those states was very small compared to the rest of the nation. And so that was the way in which they were able to hold on to some power. And as he said, blacks, of course, were counted as I was 3/5 of a man. I mean, had I been there, which is, you know, excuse me.
I didn't know that we were full men yet under the Constitution.
No, we're not. We're not. But when Stokely Carmichael, that was his name when he came here, came to speak at the University of Vermont, and he was incredible. I mean, impeccable grammar.
Right.
I mean, just a beautiful speech. And he got to one place and he said, he said, I'm sorry, I can only say 3/5 of that word. I will never forget that as long as I live. Anyway, that's an aside. That's an aside. Yes, that is the historical perspective, and I have nothing to add.
Well, now, what I hear people in Vermont locally saying, it wouldn't be fair if they got rid of, because places like Vermont wouldn't be represented. See, I mean, this is what has me annoyed by this whole
but
thing.
in a sense, that's true, because of the small
How is
population.
it not? What do you mean? We're not all Americans?
No.
You mean that most Americans can't
No.
vote for a president?
No, it's the same concept as the House versus the Senate. No matter how large the state is or how small the state is, we still have the two senators. Right. So it's a way of trying to balance out.
The two senators is not what the dispute is about.
No. I'm trying to say that the basis of it is the basis of their argument in Vermont is the same. And that is that we're a very small state. The numbers would not give us very much power in the overall point.
And it's part of,
I am cynical of that
Hey,
viewpoint.
John, I'm
well,
not,
it's all
I'm not
part
defending it.
No,
I'm saying
it's
that's
just
where
explaining
it comes
what
from.
it is.
I know that. I know you're not defending
But
it.
it's all rooted in the checks and balances
Sure.
of the system. And there are any number of so-called checks and balances in the democratic system. That happens to be one of them. You know, how do you get your electors? You take the number of representatives that you have in the House of Representatives, you add that to your 2 senators, that's the number of electors from the state. So
Right.
we have 3.
Right.
Right.
Okay?
But for the presidency,
Mm-hmm.
why is it necessary today to keep the Electoral College
No. Well, many-
intact?
The short answer?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It isn't.
It isn't.
It isn't.
That's my point.
And
Okay.
many people are saying that that day is past.
Yeah.
I mean, that it's...
It's a colonial,
mean-
it's a colonial relic. It's a
Right.
relic of colonial American history.
That's what this part, that's the part that I'm getting to. I
Yes.
mean, it's a hangover from when white men were making sure that only white men had say in running, in fact, complete control of this government.
Right.
Okay?
Yeah.
Now, I was looking at some recent figures where somebody pointed out to me that white American males represent 27% of the population. Is that true?
I
I don't know.
wouldn't know.
I really don't know that figure.
I don't know.
But it would seem to me, since I've looked around the world, even those places that we get on back, we get most, the guy or woman who gets the most, because there's a lot of places that have women that win elections, I mean, and then lead their countries. Interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
All those places that we talk about, that there are a lot of those places have women leaders.
Yes.
Yeah.
Norway, for example. There's a lot of the, Finland too, I think.
Sure.
So what is it about our democracy that we haven't rid ourselves of something that is from slavery, so couched? Why are we so ensconced in something that we can't change the system?
Because I think it's viewed as so deeply rooted in the American heart and soul, so much a part of the American culture and heritage that people have never really thought about changing it until now, until we get this kind of crisis. You know, frankly speaking, the electoral system, as it's instituted now, only favors 2 parties because it's a winner-take-all system.
Right.
And you will never get an effective 3rd party in a system such as we have where there's winner-take-all. If delegates to the Electoral College were apportioned, if electors were apportioned, it would be an entirely different story. But they're not. And Ross Perot, in his infinite wisdom, even recently said, there is no place in American politics for 3rd parties. 3rd parties are destined to fail because the electoral system guarantees that they'll fail.
Yes.
And he's right.
See, I think
Yeah.
all of this needs to be studied. I think we need to study, for example, moving to a ranking system in elections, for example, like Australia has. I think a lot of benefits to that, and we need to study it. My worry here, quite frankly, is that, at least in my mind, I don't want our argument over whether or not the Electoral College is good or bad to interfere with the Florida situation.
Thank you.
Because in my head, okay, Mr. Gore not only won the popular vote, he won the electoral vote too. And I think if all the votes were counted, as Vaughn has said over and over again, I believe it would come out that he won Florida, okay? So I don't think that whether or not we have an electoral college or a popular vote, all that all needs to be studied. But it has no bearing in my head on what happened in Florida.
Well, the more immediate issue, of course,
I mean,
is what
I'm
happened in
glad that you
Florida.
pulled us
Yeah,
back
okay,
to that issue.
okay.
And, you know,
All right.
while
But
we're talking
I'm
about,
glad that we
Thank
also
you.
touched on the
Yeah, let's
electoral
touch on
system,
that.
because
That's good.
that's at the
Absolutely.
bottom of this problem too, I think.
Absolutely.
But I want to go back to the disenfranchisement and this.
Wait, before we get back to
Go ahead.
disfranchisement,
Yeah.
let me just
Go ahead.
note one thing that has gotten very little play in the American media. Question is, Miami-Dade County, why was the recount stopped there? What was the real issue?
What do you think it was, Vaughn?
Well,
That sounds like a rhetorical question.
yes, it is.
I think you know the answer.
It's as rhetorical as they get.
Yeah.
I know one of the answers.
Okay.
Okay? Alex Pinellas, the mayor of Miami,
Who is?
who was a Democrat, was in favor of the recount. When the first wave of ballots were counted, and there were significant gains for Al Gore, the Republicans down there panicked because they saw what was about to happen. They got to Pinellas, called a special meeting with him behind closed doors. When he came out of that meeting, he was no longer in favor of a recount and did not support the canvassing board. As a result, they shut it down. Question was, what was he promised?
Right.
How did that happen?
This meeting's
How
on
did
record,
this man
too.
do it? Yes, it is. How did this man do an about face in the wake of that? And shortly after that meeting, the voting, the mob came in. You wonder who paid for their hotel rooms and who paid the airfare there. It has fingerprints of the Republican Party all over it. They were sent there specifically to disrupt the recount in Miami-Dade, which they did very successfully. And once the support of the mayor was withdrawn, it was pretty much a done deal.
Right.
And we know that there are Democrats who have passed, who have crossed over in previous elections.
Of course.
Other Republicans.
Of
So
course.
when a reporter throws out the word that a Democrat had done something was the only proof that he could see that something happened wrong, to me that passed right over my head.
I mean, that's silly.
Given the number of Democrats who voted for Republicans in the past.
Sure.
And certainly in a place like Florida, which you and I, and which Larry has so elegantly pointed out, with the history that it has. And I'm glad, Vaughn, that some of this stuff is being told. I mean, getting back to Florida again, because again, we touched briefly on Katherine Harris's role in it.
She's a Republican Party operative.
Right, who's a co-manager of the Bush campaign, if
For
I'm
Florida.
not mistaken.
Correct. That's correct.
And whose grandfather was one of the leading bigots in Florida history.
He was a citrus king who was extremely wealthy.
And his name again?
Ben Griffin was his name. His name adorns the
Nah,
football
you
stadium.
can't make me believe that Jeb Bush would have done it. Come on. After all, the Republicans got Colin Powell, man. What's wrong with y'all,
sure.
man? And the other woman, what's her name?
Condoleezza Rice.
Oh, please.
You know, I'm so tired of being told that by white people. I don't know what to do. I'm
Is that a tiring
I'm
subject?
serious. I can't stand it.
Let me
I swear.
ask you
I
that.
hope nobody ever.
Because you know the
submits to me
civil
again.
rights movement had nothing to do with Colin Powell becoming a five-star general. I mean, you know that, don't you?
Please,
Please.
give me a break.
We,
No, I mean, I think it's important to touch on that issue because when a man like, and believe me, I've had my differences with Jesse in the past at given times.
So am I.
But I back Jesse's actions in this 100%. I don't know how the two of you feel about it.
no, so do I.
Yes, you do.
I back him.
Yes, you do. You know how we
No,
feel.
well, we hadn't said it.
Yeah, I know. We don't have
I want
to.
you on record.
We don't have to, John.
Because I feel, and the other thing we haven't touched on is what happened in the Haitian American community.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, absolutely.
Which is more
Absolutely.
criminal than went on in the black American community.
Yep. Yep.
With the dual languages. Now somehow in those Cuban communities
Oh,
that
yeah.
are pro-Republican, they didn't have the problem with the dual.
They don't have a problem with the language.
Yeah.
Right.
So the disenfranchisement is even deeper.
Of course it is.
Yeah, it is.
Of course it is.
Because the stories that I heard, and I saw C-SPAN, read like something from the 60s. Larry, I mean that. Yeah, I thought I was back in the middle of the 60s
Well,
again.
So
Go
did
ahead.
I. That's what I was trying to say.
Yeah, go
that
ahead.
nothing really has changed. It reminded me of when I grew up, because that's the way it was when I grew up.
Right.
And nothing has changed. It's the same thing, a little more sophistication maybe, but I'm not sure, because I think when all this stuff comes out that Vaughn is talking about, and it will, when it comes out, you're going to find that it's not more sophisticated.
It's the
That
same
it's
old
the
stuff.
same old thing that has been done to us all these years.
See, you were talking about disappointed. I'm very angry.
I'm angry too. but
I
mean,
am seriously angry, and I know that upsets white America, but, you know, you have to get used to it. First we start off with the 3/5 stuff. Now we're supposed to be the full person. And the thing that's amazing to me is there's some voices in the Democratic thing that are quiet. For example, the Attorney General of the country comes from Florida. Miami-Dade, if I'm not mistaken.
That's correct.
The first Deputy Attorney General is a black guy, Eric Holden,
right.
Eric Holder, right.
has kept quiet. The Director, or the Attorney General in charge of civil rights, Lee,
Bill Langley.
Yeah.
nothing. Where are the stalwarts, Vaughn? And I'm addressing this one directly to you. Where are they in this?
Well, I think what we're seeing is the limp of the lame duck. All of these people are preparing to transition out of government, and
I mean, this might interfere with their next job.
thank you.
Oh, okay.
And
Let's get it set.
And I don't think that Bill Clinton wants to step in and interfere at this stage of his presidency.
Yeah, and I understand why Bill Clinton doesn't want to step in if you don't.
You know, well,
I mean, he's
understand.
taken enough heat for his issues
course.
about race for 8 years.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it would look extremely partisan on his part. Many people are angered that he will not turn over transition funds and the keys to the transition building, office building in Washington, D.C. And you know, I think with very good reason, they are withholding sanction of that until the courts determine what happened in Florida and who, in fact, is the winner. But you know, I want to address the issue of sore losers. I mean, you know, you've seen the signs, sore
Yeah.
loserman, you know, Gore Lieberman, sore loserman. As far as I'm concerned, that is just stark, staring nonsense. It's an attempt on the part of many in the media and those in the highest places of the Republican Party to effectively whitewash what happened in Florida. I don't really want to get started on sore losers, except to say that, in my view, the Republicans who run the Republican National Committee and who are on the far right wing in Congress are the sorest losers on this planet. When they lost the presidency to Bill Clinton in 1992, it was the bitterest pill for them to swallow. Especially George Bush the elder, because he felt that he was cheated out of his legacy. But the campaign didn't end in 1992. The Republicans continued a campaign against Bill Clinton designed to prohibit him from running this country, as a president should. We started with Whitewater, which was a $50 million fishing expedition that turned up nothing, and we ended with an impeachment farce. Those very same people who are saying, well, we can't drag the country through the trauma
Right.
of this, you know, protracted election fight. You know, it'll just traumatize the country. It'll, you know, destabilize. These are the same people who insisted on that
Oh,
impeachment
I'm going to
farce.
stop you right there, because here's why I want to stop you.
Yeah, stop me.
I
before
hear the white establishment, and I'm going to say it just that way, Democrat and Republican alike, media being part of that process. We are a country of laws. Has Al Gore broken any laws? Is he under his constitutional right to take these cases to court?
He has.
Are the rest of the people who are disenfranchised breaking the law by taking these things to court? Are any laws being broken?
Absolutely not.
Uh-huh.
They are being told
Oh, I
to
see.
sit, to
Here we
sit
go
down.
again.
They're being told to sit down, shut up, and let this thing go through.
Larry, here we are. We're right back to it again.
And the media is pushing that like crazy.
Yes, they are.
Big
You
time.
can't turn the television or radio on and not hear about the,
Well, see, I have a hard time. Tell me what they're saying on BET.
what'd you say?
What is BET saying about it?
Well, would it,
Black Entertainment Channel, which has black news
would it,
casters
would it matter?
who are not under the control.
Well, first of all, would it matter?
Yes, to me it matters.
I know, but you can't get it here anyway.
But I want you to tell me.
I'm just,
Give me a
please,
synopsis
I'm sorry.
of what you're
I
talking
told you
about.
I was a cynic, John.
Yeah, I know.
Excuse me.
I understand that.
Well, they're saying exactly what we're saying. and that is that it
Uh-huh.
is within their perfect legal right. As a matter of fact, it's an obligation.
It's an obligation.
It's a legal obligation to push this process until some real and true information comes out of it.
Oh, I see. As black folks, we should follow the letter of the law up until,
Of course.
but as it affects white folks, we don't have to do that.
That's but hasn't it always been that way? What has changed, John? Nothing. Very difficult to be optimistic. Very difficult.
Yeah, it is.
You have to have evidence to be optimistic, and there ain't no evidence out there. Now, do I still have hope? Yeah, I guess I do, because you don't need any evidence for hope. You make that big leap, you know, that things could be better, and you just believe that. You don't need information or evidence, but you need evidence to be optimistic, and I don't see any, and therefore I ain't optimistic. Younger people can be optimistic.
Well, you know, I mean, you know, in talking to Vaughn, I mean, and there's another young black lawyer in his state who Vaughn's friends with,
Yes.
Leroy and Nesbitt. Haven't talked to all the black lawyers in the state because I don't think it's that many in the first place, but
Maybe 5.
Leroy and Vaughn are who I talk to the most, and frankly, I do that because they're kind of independent of the power structure in some ways.
Yes. Yes.
And consequently, I am tired of hearing a particular viewpoint that is what is fueled, that they're all like hands in a glove.
Right.
The media, the whole cover-up aspects of this.
Right.
And then America's denial of its history. That's what, I see as an extension of Vaughn. America's denial of its history, not only, because I think Vaughn will attest to this, if America was really practiced legally the way they say they are, we wouldn't need all the ammunitions that we had, except to change the 3/5 stuff, basically.
Yeah.
Right?
We would never have needed voting rights laws, opinions of the Supreme Court to strike down Plessy versus Ferguson, the Dred Scott decision.
Right.
I mean, there never would have been a need for that. Yeah, we would never have needed that.
Because that issue always underlying, not even so underlying sometimes, color.
May I put in a plug for a
Sure.
book other than Vaughn's book?
Yeah.
Which I wish everybody would read, and that is Randall Robinson.
Oh,
The
yeah.
Debt.
Yes.
The
I read it.
Debt. I know you read.
I know.
I wish everybody would read it.
Say it
because I
slowly
think
for people.
The Debt. D-E-B-T. Randall Robinson.
From
Trans-Africa.
Trans-Africa.
He's executive director of
Oh, that's
And
that nut.
it is
that's
so
that
well
nut,
done.
That's that nut that had the nerve
Yeah,
to
right.
be involved in trying to free South Africa.
That's
ain't it?
right.
That's right.
That's
Oh,
right.
okay.
That's right.
Okay.
Yes, he was
troublemaker.
That's
That
right.
troublemaker,
He's a troublemaker.
right?
That's
Troublemaker.
right. He was
Yeah.
my mentor and big brother in law school, and I am forever grateful to Randall
And I am
Robinson.
forever grateful to him too. And this book is so well written, and so everything is so
But
documented.
I don't see Randall Robinson on any of the TV programs. They're not quoting him in this whole business. Think he could tell us something about illegal elections?
I'm sure he could. I'm certain he could.
I haven't seen very many, other than the Republicans trotting out. What's that guy's name again? The former general, what was his name again?
Colin Powell?
Yeah, who they're now trotting out. He's going to represent the three of us. I mean, come on.
I have no
and the other
representative.
woman's name, Vaughn, who I...
Condoleezza Rice, who's going to be the national security advisor in a Bush administration, if there is one.
Oh, wait a minute. She's the one who pretends to be friends of one of the 4 girls that was murdered in Birmingham.
The Birmingham
Did
church
you-
bombing, yes.
Yeah.
I'm aware of that.
My God.
Yeah, I know.
There's dysfunction for you. Whoa. How do you get from that to that?
It's called common opportunism. That's what it is.
So, I noticed, though, I have to give one black Republican credit. One guy has been conspicuously absent.
J.C. Watts?
Oh,
J.C.
J.C. has taken the high road in this one, John.
Yeah.
J.C. said, I'm sorry,
Where
home.
is J.C. anyway? I haven't heard anything.
J.C.'s didn't rerun for the election.
Oh, right,
He's
okay.
down in his church somewhere praying.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
Becoming a Baptist again. Okay. And might be coaching football before it's all over, because that's what he was really good at. Now,
No, John. Ease up.
He was a better quarterback than he was politician.
He's
for me.
on
Now that we agree. That we'll agree on.
You know, but I mean, the obvious ploy, and you know, in Powell, and I have to say this in his defense, I always thought I denoted some pride in what he did and what he accomplished, but to let himself be used as a ploy, I mean, to let himself, I mean, he can't read. Did he not understand that 93% of black Americans did what?
It's okay. He has his right to think any way he
That's
wants
right.
to think. So I don't want to get into that.
Yeah. As wrong-headed as we may think it is,
Right.
he has that right.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And I think that we should point that out to people.
Yeah, I do too.
And respect it.
It's 2 minutes.
Well, I'd just like to say one thing
Yeah.
in closing. I think on a deeper level, on a very atavistic level, what we're seeing with this election and the way that the vote broke down is Armageddon, the last gasp, the final battle of the culture wars of the 60s, where you have a fairly significant part of the Solid South and the Great Plains who yearn to return to the good old days of white male hegemony, when ethnic minorities
Had no
knew their
say.
place and were invisible, when gays and lesbians were locked in the closet, when women were seen and not heard, and when father knew best.
Okay, Larry.
I have nothing to add to that. That's
I
beautiful. That's beautiful.
I
love
need
it.
to say goodbye, and I'm going to be having both these guests back together and individually. But America and Vermonters, and we didn't talk about the local elections in Vermont, I am going to say this was an ugly local election. And that the local politics and words like niggers being used and faggots being used in this society and in this state, that went on. The ugliness of Florida reached into this state. So we all need to face up to the issue that there's still something drastically wrong with this republic. So in closing, I would like to say good morning to all those of you who are fortunate enough, and thank you to my two guests.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, John.
And in the words, hasta la vista, or sayonara, goodbye.
Assalamu alaikum.
We won't go there because next we'll be accused of being Muslims.
Oh, I forgot. I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you, John.
Thanks, John.
Thank you.